friends, today I want to introduce you to a great thinker who lived in the last century. His name was Hans Jonas. I have studied extensively his writings and I found them very useful for my philosophical theological formation. I will show you that even if he was a Jewish thinker, his approach can enrich Christian theology. In this video, firstly, I provide a very short introduction to Jonas' philosophical theological perspective. Then, I will share with you 8 of his quotations which reveal his theological contributions. You will hear these quotations with the voice of Hans Jonas, since I used a computational method to recreate his voice using the information extracted from an audio file containing his voice that I found in internet. See link in the description. In the description of this video, I will put the key moments of this presentation so that you can click and watch the parts which interest you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let us start by giving a brief summary of the philosophical theological perspective of Hans Jonas. Hans Jonas was a Jewish thinker. He also engaged in his work with Christian theology. I've published a book entitled The Philosophical Theological Contributions of Hans Jonas, A Possible Enrichment for Christian Theology. See link in the description. In this book, I argue that Hans Jonas' perspective can enrich Christian theology. Hans Jonas' theological perspective in relation to Christianity is one of the most fascinating aspects of his thought, especially given his deep intellectual and personal relationship with the Christian theologian and biblical scholar Rudolf Bultmann, who was his teacher at Marburg in Germany. Bultmann was one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century, known for his project of demythologization of the New Testament, that is, the interpretation of biblical myths existentially through the lenses of Martin Heidegger's existential philosophy. Jonas studied under both Bultmann and Heidegger in Marburg in the 1920s, and he was part of that circle with Karl Löwit and Hannah Arendt and others, where theology, philosophy, and existential analysis intersected. Initially, Jonas was deeply impressed by Bultmann. He admired how Bultmann used Heidegger's existential categories to reinterpret Christian faith. Some of these existential categories are authentic existence, temporality, decision, etc. For Bultmann, the mythic language of Scripture had to be reinterpreted existentially as expressing the human condition before God. Jonas appreciated this attempt to make Christianity philosophically intelligible in the modern world. However, Jonas, later in his career, became critical of Bultmann's demythologization, especially after the Holocaust and through his study of Gnosticism. In particular, Jonas felt that in existential theology, the world risked to become the stage for individual decisions rather than having an intrinsic moral and ontological value. Jonas believed that Christianity must affirm the goodness and the responsibility for creation, something that Gnosticism denied. Jonas worried that some forms of Christianity came dangerously close to a modern form of Gnosticism, which views the world as intrinsically evil. Instead, Jonas endorses the view that in creation there are natural ends which are intrinsically good. For example, Jonas observes all living beings desire to be alive. So it is as if every living being is continuously saying yes to life, And in this yes, there is a teleology, there is an end, the desire to be alive. So to be alive is something good, something which is imprinted in creation. So, in other words, creation is intrinsically good. This continuous self-affirmation of life is deeply teleological. Teleology derives from teleos, which means end. Jonas's later philosophical theological project, especially in the book The Imperative of Responsibility, can be read as an ethical and metaphysical correction to what he saw as the Gnostic tendencies in modern thought, including some forms of Christian theology. So for Jonas, first, the world is not meaningless. Rather, the world is the arena of the divine self-manifestation and of human moral responsibility. Secondly, God's transcendence and immanence must be thought in a new way after Auschwitz and in the age of technology. Thirdly, humanity must assume responsibility for creation, since the power of modern science has given humans quasi-divine creative capacities. Although Jonas was Jewish, his theology overlaps with Christianity in several crucial respects. For example, his ideas of God's self-limitation and suffering resonates with Christian kenotic theology and the idea of a suffering God, as in Bultmann's book The Crucified God. His emphasis on responsibility for creation parallels modern Christian ecological and ethical theologies. And then his critique of Gnosticism is both historical, so as an historian of religion, and also theological. Jonas, in fact, saw both ancient Gnosticism and certain modern existential or nihilistic tendencies as threats, a point deeply consonant with Christian incarnational theology. In my book, The Philosophical Theological Contributions of Hans Jonas, I go through these topics and I engage with all Jonas's writings, in which he provides philosophical theological reflections in order to provide a full, comprehensive understanding of Jonas's philosophical theology. In particular, in the book, I discuss Jonas's reflections on 1. St. Paul and St. Augustine, 2. Cosmogony, 3. Theodicy, and 4. His argument for God's existence. Moreover, through a careful search in the literature, I identify and discuss the work of approximately 40 Christian theologians who have engaged with Jonas's perspective. In my book, I also outline the existence of several dialectical tensions in Jonas's view of God. For example, the view of God who is concomitantly transcendent and immanent. In the book, I also provide a critical assessment of Jonas' theology. I identify and discuss some contradictions between Jonas' reflections and Christian orthodoxy. I then suggest, using specific theological frameworks, different correctives for these problematic issues. I argue that these correctives enable to remain faithful to Jonas' perspective whilst also remaining compatible with Christian orthodoxy. Let us now analyze 8 quotations of Jonas, revealing his philosophical theological perspective. You will hear them in his voice. In this video, I decided to perform an experiment that I never did before. In my research, I found a recording of Jonas speaking in English in a seminar. sealing in the description. This recording at the date of 5th of May 1967. So listen to his voice. That's how Jonas spoke.
The revolution we have in mind concerns the world we live in, consequently the ways of our living, and finally, or perhaps first, the modes of our thinking. In brief, what is being revolutionized is human environment, behavior, and thought.
Using a computational method, I was able to recreate Jonas's voice, and I will now use this voice to read 8 of his quotations. I will also briefly comment these passages, since they are very important to understand Jonas's philosophical theological approach. First quotation. During 1920s, Jonas reflected on 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. Here in the slide you can see the text of this biblical passage. For we walk by faith, not by sight. The word faith in Greek is pisteos. The word sight in Greek is eidos. Let us hear how Jonas commented this text. Please keep in mind that the voice that you will now hear has been recreated using a computational method. You will hear that this voice is very similar to the voice that you heard before from the audio of Jonas' seminar recorded during the 1960s. Let us hear Jonas reading this quotation.
There exists a fundamental and in no way bypassable breakthrough of immanence for the interpretation of the phenomena in question, a constitutive claim of a transcendence which in principle cannot be made visible, a transcendence of God.
If you want to know more about the meaning of this quotation and the theological implication, please read my book on pages 9, 12, 68, 223, and 313. Second quotation. In 1930, Jonas published a book on St. Augustine and the problem of freedom, after exchanging some ideas with the famous Christian theologian and biblical scholar Rudolf Bultmann. Let us now hear a quotation taken from this book, in which Jonas also reflects on Romans 7.
By accepting God's demand, man has also accepted to stand in his creaturely condition before God. By grasping his highest, ineluctably granted potential as a spirit, he has simultaneously ventured and exposed himself to the extreme consequences, so that his failure is certain. The fact that he experiences this is the meaning of this possibility and the purpose for which it has been granted to him. For despite its essential hopelessness, that aspiration to fulfill the law is not a frivolous presumption. It is indeed a tremendous undertaking, but one for which man must be prepared, since it constitutes God's demand, and without it grace is not prepared for him. And this undertaking, assigned to him, finds its positive significance precisely in its desperate condition. Since it is from God that man awaits his critical judgment, his creaturely condition must here manifest itself in its extreme possibility.
As you can see, in this slide I also put the text of Romans 7:24, because I believe this quotation is connected to the existential state of man in front of the law. This long quotation by Jonas is taken from a German book, see picture in the slide. Jonas republished this book in 1965. This German writing has never been translated into English, but I have discussed this book in depth in chapters 1 and 5 of my own book. Moreover, I have translated many passages from the original German into English within those chapters. St. Augustine explained that there are 2 states, homo sub lege, meaning man under the law, and homo sub gratia, meaning man under grace. What Jonas describes in this quotation and what you see depicted here in the painting and in Romans 7:24 is the state of homo sub lege, man under the law. Essentially here Jonas is saying that the state under the law is the precondition which is necessary to move to the state under grace. He is saying that the aspiration to fulfill the law is necessary for achieving the state of grace. Let us pay some attention. One could accuse Jonas of being a Pelagian. No, Jonas is not a Pelagian. He is saying that the aspiration to fulfill the law is necessary for attaining the state of grace. He is not saying that perfect obedience to the law brings a person into that state. The main insight we can draw from Jonas is that law and grace should not be seen in a dualistic opposition to each other, but rather in a dialectical relationship. In the faithful, there is a healthy oscillation between homo sub lege and homo sub gratia. If you would like to know more about this, please read my book. Third quotation. In 1964, Jonas affirmed,
Theology should guard the radical transcendence of its God, whose voice comes not out of being, but breaks into the kingdom of being from without.
I have discussed this quotation on pages 21 and 313 of my book. Let us now move to the fourth quotation. In 1968, Jonas affirms,
To say of the world that it is created is to say that it is not its own ground, but proceeds from a will and plan beyond itself, in whatever form one conceptualizes the dependence on such transcendent cause.
If you want to know more about this, please read pages 9, 98, and 312 of my book. Fifth quotation. Jonas comments a biblical text from Amos chapter 3, verse 8. The lion has roared, who will not fear? The Lord God has spoken. Who can but prophesy? During the 1970s, Jonas explains.
What is here talked about if not an eruption of transcendence into immanence? Those who experienced and spoke thus were not discoverers of a hidden God, but hearers of a God making himself known and willing, through them, to make himself known to all the world. The initiative is his, unless we contend to know better than they, and that presupposes a will on the part of him who reveals himself, therewith also a temporal aspect in himself, and power to do so, that is, to act into the world, and this via the human soul.
If you want to know more about this quotation, please read pages 9 and 313 of my book. Sixth quotation. In an interview conducted in 1975, Jonas affirmed,
I have one near certitude. Without some revival of religious commitment, Western man will not be able to find the motivations that are necessary to answer the danger of technological self-destruction.
Please see pages 9 and 319 of my book to know more about this quotation. Seventh quotation. In an interview conducted in 1990, Jonas affirms,
As a religious person, I would say that God, but not nature, has a stake in our existence.
To know more about this quotation, see pages 10 and 33 of my book. Finally, this is the last quotation. In the year before his death, Jonas affirmed,
The fact that the world offers possibilities, the finitude that God at the origin would not have had on his own, must somehow be assumed to be the reason why the world was created in the first place. And therein lies the validity to recognize an inherent right to creation from the outset. That is precisely what is included in my myth.
To know more about these, please see pages 10 and 260 of my book. I hope that after listening to these 8 quotations, which you have listened with Jonas' own voice, recreated computationally, you have now a desire to know more about his philosophical theological perspective. If you have this desire, please read my book and get in touch with me or write some comments to this video. I really believe that Jonas' perspective can enrich Christian theology. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you the next time.